Hey, what is up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. This is the third and final in this series on creating a custom pop-up modal slider. So you can come in here and click on any of these, and it will just slide right around. And it acts like an infinite slider, so when you get to the end, it'll loop back around. And then you can close out here. You can close out with the escape key. You can close out by clicking over here. You can also tab to things as well. We're going to work on all of that today. Now, I did mention in the very first video that typically, if you're putting something like this into production, you're probably usually better served to actually use a JavaScript library because there's so many use cases for things you wouldn't think of, different random screen sizes and stuff like that, that usually using something like that is a much safer bet. But I do think that actually practicing your JavaScript, learning how to work with all this data is super helpful. And you only really get to do that by actually building stuff out just like we're doing right now. So if you haven't followed along with the first two, you're welcome to just jump in right now. You can go to the GitHub link in the description, start at lesson 3, and then just grab the code from here and you can download it and open it in your favorite code editor. And then we're going to jump right in. All right, so what we're going to do first of all, before we get going too far, is we've got basic functionality from last time where we've got the CSS and how we can pop this up and close it. It's not really live dynamically loading anything right now. But you can click off. We actually added the escape key as well, or you can click that little arrow or click off the modal. So that's what we've got so far, which means what we've got to do now is actually load the live images and then cycle through them and figure out that whole transition. Now, because there's a decent amount of complexity, what I'd like to do is actually try to break this out into some steps, and then we'll follow those steps as we go. So let me come up top here and let's add a few comments. So first of all, we're going to want to initialize the gallery that's going to pop up. So with the actual images, in other words, get the thing ready to actually load images depending on which one we click. Then whenever we click, we want to update the gallery with those images and indicators. So images and indicators. All right, then number 3, we're going to work on moving the gallery on clicking those buttons. And then 4, we're going to do basically advanced moving behavior. So actually looping back around and all that kind of stuff. Behavior. Can't talk and type. And then 5, we're going to do a few enhancements. All right, there's so much more you can do with this. You could add touch events. There's so many things that you probably could do if you take some time. So I'll leave you to enhance this, but we're going to kind of get it to a basic minimal viable product state and then let you take it from there. Now, what we've done so far is we've created this modal from this create gallery.js. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm not sure why I didn't catch that before. Let's actually change this to create modal.js. And the same thing here, create modal.js. That makes a lot more sense. And just to make sure everything is working, let's refresh here. Let's even try it in mobile view. And maybe let's actually pick a device. Let's do something like a SE. I click here and then see, I'm getting some overflow here too, but I should be able to close down. All right, so it's working even on mobile. And then let's kill this. Let's see, I wonder what we did on that create modal. Before we get started, we might need to change something. If we look at the modal container, here it is. So we've got this position absolute. If this is fixed, it should actually fill the whole screen. Let's try it again. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's what we're wanting. So we fixed something before we even started. Okay, so all we're doing is loading in the modal stuff. We're going to actually get rid of these images for now. We don't need those. And we're going to get rid of these indicators. So when we click, it should now just be an empty gallery. So if I click here, nothing shows, and that's just fine. All right, so we've got that create modal gallery file ready. We've created it, and now we've started to add some global query selectors up top here. Let's close down the sidebar, and I want to move a couple other things up. We have the modal container we grabbed down here. Let's go ahead and move this up top. Now, there are several other things we're going to need to use throughout this, and we need to think about this basically in 2 steps. There's going to be the stuff that we want to be connected to the modal that all 3 of these galleries are going to use. That's what we're going to do when we initialize the gallery. And then there's things that are going to be custom to each individual gallery. Now, last time when it came to kind of the style of code, we used a more object-oriented approach, and the modal itself has all these methods and things attached to it and the object that it creates when we passed in the query selector down this way. What we're going to do today is think about it more as a functional way. In other words, we're going to create functions and then just use those functions whenever we click to update things based on the event listener or that kind of stuff that we're clicking on. Either way, though, we are going to go ahead and add a few of these query selectors up top. So first, we want to grab the slider that everything is sitting in, the div that all those images are sitting in. We're going to call that modal track, like that. Document.querySelector, and that was simply modal image container. Next, let's just go ahead and declare a bunch of variables. These are going to be things that we update, so we'll all have them all set at let variables. First of all, we're going to have a transition speed. We're going to use that when we initialize the gallery. Then we're going to have the galleries. This would be basically the data from the file we're going to load. Then we're going to have modal images. This is going to be, let's go ahead and kind of set some of these out here. So this will be for each gallery. Basically, we're going to be updating this. Transition speed in galleries will be for all galleries are going to share this. And again, that's how we're going to split things up as we work through this project. We're also going to have modal indicators. And this, again, will be dependent, obviously, on each individual gallery. And then we're going to have a current index where we're at on the slide. And again, that will be for each gallery as we load it. And then just for ease of use, we're going to have a last index here. And basically, this will be the last item in the array of images for that individual gallery. You could also just do like dot length -1, but we're just going to do it here so we can write last index throughout the document. And then as we transition everything, we are going to have a variable called isMoving. It's just a Boolean, and it will be set to false. We're going to use that to determine basically when that sliding happens and what happens after the sliding. We need to know if the thing is moving, and that's what we're going to use here. All right, so that was actually all in prep for these 5 steps. Now let's run over to the HTML file, because what we want to do is actually do most of the heavy lifting in the JavaScript, but give the user, ourselves, enough chance to actually change how the thing operates when we actually write the script or reference the script. So I'm going to actually take this out of the head, and I'm going to move this all the way down to the base of the body here. And we don't need to defer it anymore because it's already at the bottom. And I'm actually going to just remove all of this and leave it as type module, and then come down here to the script section, and here's where we're actually going to import what we need. So we're going to write a function, and we're going to import it here. It's going to be called init gallery. And then we'll init that from our .js. In fact, I think I've got that on my clipboard. Yeah. So .js, .gallery app, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So we're going to actually grab this file from here. Then we're going to run that init gallery. And we're going to pass it 2 things. One will be a reference to the file that holds all of our images for our galleries. If we open this up, you'll notice here it's in the data folder and then galleries. Now this would probably be some kind of endpoint, like an API endpoint or something. But in this case, it's just a data file. So I'll come in here and say data galleries.json. And then we're also going to pass an object to it. And right now I'm just going to have one option in here, and that will be the speed. And we're going to set that for right now. Let's set it to like, I don't know, 400, 300, something like that. All right, now what we've done here is we've treated this thing as a module. We've imported the function we're going to write in a second, and then we've passed to that function both reference to the file, and then we've given it an object, an options object, which right now it just has one option. That's probably all we're going to do, but you can see how to use this so that way you can write your own options and add them in when you're initializing the gallery. So when I save this, it's going to throw an error at me, and that's because we haven't actually written it yet. So let's come over here, and let's go ahead, let's scroll to the bottom. Let me close the sidebar here, and we're going to write a function here that's that initialize gallery. Now it's actually going to be a fetch statement, basically, so I've got a little shorthand here so you don't have to watch me type all of this out. What we're going to do is we're going to name this thing init gallery. Now, generally speaking, I have it run right away on these kinds of things, but obviously we're doing that in the HTML, so I don't need to do that here. Now, because this is a module and I'm exporting it, I need to actually write export, and then we're going to add this as the default, and that enables us to write it down here without it being in curly brackets. Now, there were 2 things we passed in. One was the endpoint, or the file, and then one was that options object. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass the endpoint in here for the fetch. So we're going to actually fetch this endpoint. And notice it's an async await, which means we're going to actually get the file back and then be able to operate on that file. What we're doing here is just double checking that there is a response and that it's okay. Assuming it is, it just passes down the chain. If there's any kind of problem, it's going to call it out here. So the first thing we're going to do is update two variables. We had a variable up top called galleries, and remember that just is going to hold all the data that we got from our endpoint. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to pass in the data and say, hey, that's what galleries now points to. We also had our transition speed, and that is now going to be equal to the options object and then dot speed. If I save this, let's see, options. Then what I can do is I'm going to come down here, I'm going to console log the galleries, and I'm going to console log transition speed. And if I come back over here, it should actually show me that 400 and the data that was just passed in. Now there's one thing we need to think about, which is what if you don't pass in a transition speed? So if I come over here and let's say I don't pass in this object, let's make that optional. And if I did that, and I come back over here, then if I save, I'm going to actually get an error over here because it's trying to read something that's not being passed in. So what we can do is come over here and let's actually make this optional, which we can do with this little question mark dot. So it's saying, hey, if it's there, give it to me. And if not, let's do an or statement and say, let's set it to 250. All right, so now if I save it again, it should actually show me 250. If I come back over here and add that back in and then save, it should say 400. So either way, you're going to get something passed in. It'll give us 250, that's 250 milliseconds, and then we're going to use that during our transition. Now, right now, we've got this open image gallery event listeners, which isn't spelled correctly, number one, I just noticed, and number two doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What we were doing is saying, hey, set an event listener on all of these. So let's call this something else. Let me grab both of these. I'm going to call this attach open gallery event listeners. All right, so I've got that. Now I'm going to actually run this, not on page load, but basically after I've done this fetch. So I added it down there. Let's get rid of this console log. I'm going to leave the galleries one for just a second. All right, so here's the moment of truth. Let's double check this actually still works. If I click, this should open up. And if I close it, it should close. Now, obviously, we took the images out, so they're not showing, but we didn't break anything, and that's good. And we actually know that we're getting the data in, and we've attached those event listeners, and they're working. So let's scroll back up top here. We know now that we've initialized the gallery. Now what we want to do is update the gallery with the images and the indicators based off of which image we click on. So if we look down at our global query selectors, we've updated this transition speed and the galleries. All the galleries are going to share this. That's what we did on the initialization. So the rest of our work then we know is for each of the galleries. What we're going to update first of all then is this modal images array and this modal indicators array. We'll also then set the current index, get the last index, and then figure out if this is moving or not. And every time we update any of the galleries, so when we click on a new image, we're going to want this to all update for us for each individual gallery. Let's come down here then, and we're going to write another function, and let's call this update gallery. We're going to pass in whatever gallery we've clicked on. I'll show you how we're going to do that in just a second. And right now, we're just going to console.log the gallery. Now, where would we call this? Well, we're going to call it when we actually click on an image up here with our event listeners that we just did. Right now, we're just opening the modal. What we want to do, though, instead is not just open the modal, but also update the gallery. Let's come back over and look at our index.html, because what we did for each of the images here is when you click on one of these buttons, we've got data-modal equals true. That just tells it it will open a gallery. And then we've added a data-gallery and given it a name. Now that name corresponds with our data file. So if I come back over here, I've got this galleries.json file, and basically I've got individual things. So I've got this name food with all of its images, and then I got name mountains and name plants. So we're using that name to select the right gallery. So before we do too much, let's comment that out, and I'm just going to console.log whatever we clicked on. So we've done the event listener on each of the buttons, which means on whatever buttons clicked on, we can look at and say, look, give me the button.dataset.gallery. So in other words, data-gallery. So let's save that, come over here, and I'm going to click on this, and I should get food. Click on this, I should get mountains. Click on this, and I should get plants. All right, so that's good. So now what we want to do is look at the data that we got in at that fetch and see if there's any galleries that match the name that we got here. And remember, it's just an array down here, name food, name mountains, name plants. And we updated our global variable galleries with that data. So I'm going to say galleries.find, and then we're going to find the gallery. Let's just name it G to keep it simple. So I'm going to say find G, and the gallery.name, which was, again, if you just come in here to each of these individual objects, they have a name. So make sure, check their name. And we're just asking, does it equal button.dataset.gallery? And if it does, it should return that to us. So let me save this, come over here. I need to add one more. So if I click here, it gives me that exact object. Click here, that object, click here, that object. Great, now what I want is not just that, but I want the images. So I've selected the right gallery, now give me the images. And if I come over here and click again, now I'm just getting the images. That should be just the mountains. And again, it's array, and this array has a bunch of objects in it with our images that have both alt tags and the actual source of the files. This is what I want to pass to my update gallery function. So now I can come in here and I'm going to say update gallery. Let's take this thing out. And now if I save this, I come over here and I click, it should console log because I've already got it down here. So I know I'm now getting an array of images. So we could even call this gallery images, something like that, since that's what we were just passed, and that's what we're now getting. Now up top, next to these query selectors, these global variables here, we want to update the current index to be equal to 1. We're always going to start there, and then the last index as well to be equal to the last item in the array that was passed in. So let's come back down here and let's do that now. Actually, I'm going to move this up so it's technically above where it's called. And here we're going to say current index is equal to 1. That's how they're always going to start. Even if we close it down, we're not going to pick back up where we stopped. We're just going to keep it right where it was at. Then I'm going to say the last index is equal to gallery images dot length. And usually you do -1 to get the exact last number, but I'm going to leave it like this, and I think you'll see why, because we're going to be manipulating how many items are in the array. And basically, I don't want to go to the very last one. I want to go to the second to last one. So if we come back up here, we've now taken care of this and this. All right, is moving is already set to false, so we don't need to change that right now. So we do need to update these two, modal images and modal indicators. We're going to do that as well. And what I'm going to do is pass the gallery images to another function that's going to basically process whatever it's been passed and return to us the items for modal images and modal indicators. So we can actually destructure that into modal images and modal indicators. And we're sending out all this to a function we're going to write called add images and indicators to modal. Let's call it to gallery. And we're passing this the gallery images. So we need to write this function, obviously. We haven't done that yet. So let's come up here and let's write it right here. So function that, and it's going to be passed in a gallery. Technically, it's gallery images. Probably shouldn't name that the exact same thing. So we'll just say data. Maybe we should say, how about array of images? All right, that's crystal clear what it is. So it's an array of images. Let's use our old friend console.log here, and let's log what we're getting. So we've got array of images. Just to make sure everything is getting passed through properly, I should be able to come in here, click, all those come, undefined is not iterable. Oh, I haven't returned anything. Ignore that for now. Now what we want to do is we're actually going to set out all of these images into a new array, and not only are we going to have whatever images are in that array, but we're also going to duplicate the first and last item. And we're going to put the first image at the very last of the array and the last image at the first of the array. And the reason we're going to do that is because as we slide over, we're eventually going to hit what is the first image again. And the way we can do that is by putting it at the last item of the array. Then we can take that transition off quickly, jump back to the spot where it's back at the beginning, and then put the transition back on. That will make it look like that infinite loop gallery. So the way we're going to get a new array here is we're going to add this in array and just spread this array of images into it. Now, it's not going to look a whole lot different if I come over here and click. It's just going to look like those 7 images in an array like it originally was. But what that allows us to do is to actually just spread in some extra ones. So the first and the last. So the easiest one to understand is array of images 0. So we're going to pass in the first item at the very end. And then I'm going to pass in array of images. And then we're going to pass in last index -1. All right, in this case, we actually do really truly want the last one. If I save this and come over here, we should actually get 9. All right, we should now get 9. I'm getting undefined. And that should be our last index. Let's see, if I just say array of images dot length, I can write that one more time. Dot length -1. That should be correct. Let's double check. I'm getting 9. Okay, There you go. All right, so you see we're getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again is at the beginning, the end here, and 7's at the very beginning. Now that we've got our fresh array, what we're going to want to do is map over it. So I'm going to actually just put this on a new line just for readability's sake, and we're going to map over these things and say for each item, so for each, we're just going to call them images. They're objects of images technically. I'm going to add some HTML. So I want an image tag here with a class. Let's see, we need an actual tag, and it's in backticks here, so I can add in some templating here. I want a class of modal image, like we had it on our fake images to start with, and then our src is going to be equal to the image that was passed in .src. As you can see here, that's the actual property name, and then our alt is going to be equal to image .alt. And then I want to actually join this because the map is just going to return an array. So I'm going to join this on nothing. So if I save this here and I click an image, I should now just get a string for HTML. Now our div that holds all of these images was called modal track. We made that at the beginning. So what we're going to do is set the inner HTML to all of that. Let's see, and I don't need these parentheses here. But if I save this and come over here and click, it should actually add all of those to the gallery. Now we can't see it right now because everything's broken, but if I come over here and I expand the gallery, the modal image container, I should have 9 images, and that's what I've got. Okay, so that is now working properly, and just to make sure, let's come over here, click a different one, and open this back up. And now I've got different ones that are all mountains. Okay, so that's working properly. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and work on the indicators. So let's put some comments here. So we'll say add images to gallery. All right, now what we want to do is create indicators for each of those. So add indicators to gallery. Now in this case, this is the only time we're going to use that div that holds the indicator. So let's just do a document.querySelector right here. And we call those modal, indicator container. And we're going to set the inner HTML, now that we know what we're doing here, to our array of images. And all we're going to do is map directly over those. We don't need to add extra ones because we don't want additional kind of like ghost indicators. We just want the exact number. So we're going to map over those, and we're going to have the actual indicator, and then we're going to have an index that we're going to pass as well. You don't have to use an index, but it does come, and if you add it, you can actually reference which number it is in the array. So I'm going to pass in here, let's see, we want a button, and this is going to have our class of modal indicator. And then we're going to actually add that index in here as a number so we can tell which one we've clicked on, and we're going to use that to actually navigate the indicators when we click on those. So we're going to set that to index like that, and I do need to actually add this in quotation marks, and then let's close out the button tag. Now again, this is just a string, so I want to say .join, and I want to join it on nothing. Now, so that this stops yelling at us, and to make sure it's actually working, let's go ahead, we're going to return both for destructuring. So we'll say return, and now that we've created both of these things and inserted them into the DOM, we can now return them as an array, and the first item will be added as our modal images. The second item will be added as our modal indicators. So I'm going to spread into here, document.querySelector all, and I'm passing in our modal image. So each modal image is going to be passed in an array, and these will be actual elements in the DOM. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, document.querySelector all. I'm going to pass in a modal indicator. If we did all that correctly, if I save, pull this back up, let's open this up and click. And I have a little error here where I have to add document.querySelector all. And let's try again. I click. Okay, so now it actually opens, and you see they're actually laid out like that. Now let's zoom out so we can kind of see what's going on. So again, we've created these images here, and let's see if I can actually scroll them. Are they scrollable? Not quite, but I've got 1, 2, 3, and eventually the other however many are in this. So this is technically the first image. This is technically the last image that we have all the way and copied at the beginning. And I've got the right number of indicators here as well. If I zoom back in, you'll see as I hover, they actually have the hover state since we already added that in the CSS. This all works properly as well, and they're all stacked out just like we want them to be. So if we come up back top here, what we've done now is update the gallery with the images and the indicators. So we're on to step 3. So let's next work on the basics of moving the gallery. So let's write a little function. We're just going to call it a function. How about move gallery? Now it doesn't need to take anything in, but what I want to do is actually say the modal track, so the whole div that holds those containers, .style.transform, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually translate it to the left. So we'll say translate x, and in backticks we can add a template here, or we're going to take the current index, all right, which we set to 1 when we first click the image. But we're going to say that needs to be times -100. And we'll add a percentage sign here, and then we'll close this off and take this move gallery, and when we first click, we actually want it to move 100% of its width to the left. So I'm going to add that in down here. And now if I save this again and come over here and click, I should now make essentially what looks like the second image actually be visible. And if you remember, we duplicated this first one over here. Now the other thing is whenever it moves, we actually want the active indicator to show. So let's come back up to our move gallery. And I'm going to write another a reference to a function called show active indicator. And let's write that up here. So we'll say show active indicator. The first thing we're going to want to do is remove the active class from all of those indicators. Now right now it's not on any of them, but as we transition, we don't want them to stay. We want them to be removed. So I'm going to grab all the modal indicators that we updated when we clicked on the gallery image, and we're going to say .for each. We'll just say I for indicator. So for each of these, let me wrap this in parentheses for each of these indicators. And with the indicator.classList .remove active. Now right now that's not going to do anything, but then what I want to do is I'm going to write a little switch statement. Now, you could do this as an if statement or whatever. There's a bunch of different ways you could do this, but I'm going to write a switch statement here that just looks at the current index. And it's going to base everything off of this current index. What you can do then is say you can have different cases. So in this case, if the current index is 0, so if it's this blueberry picture, all right, so the first image in the array, which is technically the last image, all right, so if it's all the way over there, then it's not going to correspond to the proper index. So I need to say modal indicators, and then I want the modal indicators .length -1 .classList .add active. So in other words, if it gets to this image, it's technically the last image that we duplicated. So I want the last image indicator to show so that when we make that switch between the images, you won't be able to tell. And then let's break from that. The other oddball case then is if it's the very last image in the array. That's the variable we set up to give us the last image in the array, and technically it's the last index -1. And if that's the case, we want to make the first indicator show up. And then we'll break from that. And the only one we have left is not any case, it's just all the ones in the middle, and they should act as the default. And what we're going to do here is say modal indicators, and we're actually going to loop through this array, or not loop through it, but we're going to look through it with the find method, and we're going to look for the indicator. We're going to say any indicator.dataset, and remember we added index to those as a data attribute. If it equals the current index -1, then we want the class list .add to be added of active. So let me save this here. We're going to click on this and I'll explain what we did once again. Let's see if it works. It's not working. Modal indicator is not defined. This should be modal indicators, like that. All right, let's try again. All right, so now it's showing as active. So that's great. Now the easiest way to make sure this is actually working without doing a bunch of extra work, let's go to our update and let's change this to 2. Come in here and click, and now it should transition over 200, and this is giving us a different one, and you'll notice it's right there. That means if I say 0, this should pass in and make the last indicator active according to this case. So I'll save over here, and that's the truth. And if I come over here and I change it to gallery images.length, -1, and I click here, that should make the first one. Okay, so that's all working properly. Let's change this back then to 1. So we've now done a very basic move where all it's doing is moving it to the proper place to start with. Now we've got two things that can move the gallery. One are these arrows. Those will be the same no matter which gallery we're opening. And then one will be these indicators. That will change depending on the gallery. So to keep those two separate again, let's think through the arrows first. And let's go ahead and just do that when we first initialize the gallery. So I'm going to come all the way down here to our initializing here, and we're going to actually not only attach the open gallery event listeners, but the arrow listeners as well. I'm going to call those attach arrow event listeners. And then let's come up here to our event listeners and let's add that here. So function that. So let's go ahead and grab both of these arrows, and they both had a shared class of modal arrow. We'll just say for each, we'll call for each arrow arrow.add event listener. We're listening for a click. Whenever that happens, we're going to pass the event down to this arrow function. Now, each of these had an ID. One was right and one was left. So that's what we're going to use to check which one we clicked on. So we're going to say e.target.id. If that equals right, then we want the current index to be added to by 1. Otherwise, we want the current index, so that would be left, is going to be decremented by 1. And whenever we click, then we're going to run our move gallery. So if I save this and then we did that properly, I should be able to click in here. When I click, it should go over like that. And then I should be able to go back this way and it should move. And notice the indicators are updating because that's what our move gallery function will do for us. Now we added this event listener when we initialized the gallery. And now when we update the gallery, that's when we can add our indicator for the individual indicators that are loaded for each gallery. Now there's another way we could do that, and that would be using event propagation, in which case we wouldn't actually look at the individual indicators. We're just going to look at the container and then figure out what's clicked on inside of there. If we do that, that will reduce the amount of event listeners we're adding and having to remove and all this kind of stuff. So let's do that to make it easier. So in spite of the fact that these are actually going to be for each individual gallery, if we just look at the container, we can apply it when we first initialize the gallery. So let's first of all go ahead and just copy this down. We're going to change the name here to attach, not arrow event listeners, but indicator event listeners. And then I'm going to come down here and let's add this as well. Now, instead of looking at the modal arrows here, I need to look at modal indicator container. And that reminds me of a lie I said earlier, and that is that this modal, modal indicator, the modal indicator container right here, we were never going to use again. That was a lie. All right, so let's say modal, indicator container. And then let's come up top and add that to our global query selectors. And then we'll change this to, indicator. Now we can come back down to our event listeners that we're adding. We can say indicator container. And then let's go ahead and get rid of the rest of this. Right now we don't need that. And we're going to add an event listener directly on here, event listener. We're going to listen for a click. And then we definitely need the event because we need to see what it is that we clicked on. And let's just console.log the e.target. That's not the thing that was that's not the thing the event listener was set on. That's actually the indicator that was clicked. So if I save this, come back here and refresh, I should be able to click on this and it should give me the actual button I've clicked on. Now, if I click somewhere here that's in the indicator but doesn't actually have a button, it's not going to have a data index. But all of these should actually have data indexed. And you'll notice this one has 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all right, whatever they have here. So let's go ahead and write a little block like a guarding if clause here. We're going to say if e.current target, that's the thing it was called against, the actual container, if it equals the e.target, then we just want to return. Otherwise, we're going to console log you got through. All right, and then let's see if it got through. So if I click on these, it should get through. If I click here, it shouldn't do anything, all right, because it hit this guard clause and just returned. And we don't technically even need these brackets, but I just put them in so I don't forget on other if statements. Okay, so it made it through the first guard. Now we know we're actually clicking on a button. So then what we're going to do is, since we know we're clicking on a button, we're going to say current index is now going to be equal to the e.target.dataset.index. And then I'm going to call move gallery once again. I'm going to click and close down and click here. And if I click, you might expect something brilliant to happen, and it's not happening. It's actually -1 every time. And again, that's because we added extra ones for the actual gallery. So all we need to do actually is come in here and say +1. And now if we click, they should actually go to the proper one, but it's not working. Now, the reason that is it's saying there's a type error. The problem is that when we added in those index, they were actually adding them in as strings to the data set. What we need is a number so that we can add to it here. So the easiest way probably to do this is just to wrap this in a number like this, and then we're going to say that +1, and now it's actually a number and not a string. And now if I come here and I click, now it should actually go to the right one, no matter which one I click on. These arrows then also work. And again, if I click in between these, nothing's going to happen because those aren't buttons at all. All right, we are getting dangerous. We're getting close here. So we've got the moving gallery done. Let's now add a few advanced moving behaviors. So the first thing we want to do is add some kind of sliding transition. Also, we need to fix this thing where it doesn't know what to do when we get to the end. So let's start by adding a sliding transition. So we're going to come to both of the indicators and let's see, right here and right here. No, right here and right here. These two, the arrow and the indicator event listeners. And on both of these, what we're going to do is actually add a transition directly here, and then we'll remove it when we need to. And I'll show you why we're doing it the way we are. So we're going to add this directly on the modal track. That's what holds the images. That's the div that holds those images. We're going to say modal track.style.transition is equal to, and backticks here, transform. And then we've got that transition speed that we got from the user. So we're going to say milliseconds, so 250 milliseconds, 400, whatever. And then I'm going to actually copy in a cubic Bezier that I think looks better rather than making you watch me figure that out. And we're adding that both here and down here. So now if I come back over here and I click, I should be able to slide. See, nothing is happening. Oh, and I think I see why. I need to actually add this on the outside here and here. All right, let's try that again. I open this up, I slide, and now they should slide. I click, and they should click and slide over. Now that works fine and well. We get to this last one. That's when we're actually going to switch and take that transition off so we can jump all the way over here. As you'll see, it looks the same, but it's not quite, all right, as this. It's the duplicate. So we've got one more thing then we need to add to when we initialize the gallery to start with. If I come back down here, we're going to do one more thing, and that is we're going to attach a transition end listener. And let's come back up here. Let's add it, I don't know, somewhere up here. Again, this is going to be on the modal track. So modal track.add event listener. We're going to add a transition end. So what I want to know is once that transition finishes, which the only time it's going to transition is after I collect an indicator or one of those arrows. So when it first loads, I don't want to transition on it so that it'll go right to the spot without sliding to that technically second image in the array. All right, but afterwards, I want to double check that that transition has ended. Now, the way we're going to check this to make sure that you can't try to force over this transition end is at the beginning of both of these, we're going to change that is moving. So is moving to true. Now let's see, it needs to be inside the event listener. So both there and here. So is moving true. And then on both of these, we're also going to do a check. We're going to say if is moving is equal to true, then return. So on both of these, what we're saying is when you first click in here, if it's already moving, don't allow the event listener to fire. So don't do anything with the event listener. Don't allow them to advance to the next one. But assuming that it's not moving, then set it to moving so that we know it's transitioning. And then we're going to pick up in this transition end event listener. I think that'll make sense as I show you how it works. That means the first thing I need to do is set the is moving here to false. So after each transition, we say, hey, you can now click any of those event listeners again, and they will fire properly. Now, all I need to do is check which index we're at. And there's two we care about. So if current index is equal to 0, so if it's the very first image in our array, which is technically the last image in the gallery, that duplicated last image, then I want the modal track.style.transition to be equal to none. So remove that transition. Then go ahead and quickly switch the current index to the last index -2. All right, because I don't want to be at the last image. I want to be at the second to last image. And then go ahead and move my gallery. And because there's no transition, it's going to do it instantaneously, and you won't even be able to tell from the user's perspective. The other use case I care about then is not current index, but last index -1. Now, I should have just done that last index differently because I'm having to add -1s and -2s everywhere. But that's how I originally did it. And for clarity's sake, I'm just going to keep it that way. Current index here then needs to be equal to 1. And then again, I'm going to move the gallery. So let me show you what we're doing now if this worked properly. So I open this up. I'm at the first real image in the gallery. This is the duplicated last image. If I go here, the transition ends, and it should actually jump us to the proper one. Let's see, it's not doing that. See, I got my numbers mixed up here. Let's try again. So if I come here, hey, I was editing this and realized I should just speed through this. Basically what I'm doing is trying to figure out what's going on here. So I console log here, try to figure out what the current index is. And then I'm watching that. I keep changing the last index to figure out what's going on. And then I finally realize I think it has something to do with what I told you originally, that I made an error back at the beginning. All right, it has something to do with this weird last index that I messed up earlier. So let's go back and look at this. Galleries.length. Is there any other place I've updated this last index? I don't think so. All right, and I think I see the problem here. This shouldn't be gallery images. That's what was passed in. I actually want to know off of not the gallery images, but the modal images. Modal images dot length. All right, let's try that now. Let me zoom back in. Click on this. That's still correct. On these indicators, I just want to make sure those work properly. I click over. Okay, so now it's working properly. So I just typed the wrong thing. Sorry about that. You probably knew that for a long time. All right, so now it's actually updating properly. The modal images is our array of actually DOM elements. That's what we care about. So now let me come back down this way. And this should all be working properly now. Okay, so if I open this up, I click here, I should go to the first one. The transition removes, and we immediately snap to the final one. Now this is the duplicated first now over here, and this is the second to last. I move over this way, I come back here, I go to the last image in the array, which is the duplicated first, and it should remove that transition and snap me back to the first. Now, whenever I click on one of these or these indicators, remember it adds that transition back in. So that's why it looks like an infinite gallery. All right, let's go ahead and come back to our create modal, which is where we wrote that CSS, and let's comment back out overflow hidden so we can see the live effect. And then we'll do one more or two more things here in a second. So I'm going to come here, open this. I should be able to just transition, and yeah, that looks great. Okay, so let's come back over this way. Let's look at our list of stuff we had to get done. Advanced moving behavior, we're going to call that done. Now we've got a few more enhancements, and then we're all done. These are basically both speed enhancements here. So let's come to our update gallery. I'm going to copy all of this out, and I'm going to go down to our first initialization. Now, when we're initializing, we're not actually loading any images at all. What you can do to make it a little bit faster is say, hey, let's load the first of all of these. These are small images, but remember we actually have large ones that are in the gallery. So let's go ahead and load those right away, even though we're not going to show them, just so that we've done some of the loading of the images already. And it'll be the first images they see anyhow in those galleries, so it makes sense to get those loaded to start with. So we can do the same thing here, except what we're going to do is not load the gallery images. We're going to pass in the data.maps. We're going to map over all those items, the data there. And we're going to pass in each of these, let's see, galleries. And we're going to say we want the gallery.images, and we want the first in each of those. And I'm passing all those in, and so they should actually load just to start with. So if I refresh, I come over here, I should actually have those three images sitting in the modal container. And I've got those 1, 2, 3, and then duplicated. So those are already ready for me. So that speeds it up slightly. And then the other thing we can do briefly is come up. We're going to look at our, let's see, our image gallery event listeners. Right now, once we click, that's when it actually goes and tries to load the images. Now, once they're loaded, it won't be a big problem, but you can actually speed that up just slightly if you add a little hover event as well. So I'm going to actually copy this up above, and we're going to change this to mouse enter. And basically, whenever we enter the mouse over one of those images, we actually now want it to go ahead and load the galleries to kind of get it ready to start with. So if I save this, let me actually come over here and pull up the network tab, and let's click on images. All right, so if I come over here, let's refresh first of all. All right, so we've gone ahead and loaded those first ones on the fetch or on the initialization here. Let's come in here. Let me see if I can zoom out a bit so we can see what's going on. All right, I'll refresh. Now when I come over here, it should actually load those right away. And then if I click, it's already loaded them, so they're ready to go. So it speeds it up just slightly. Come over here, same thing happens. Come over here, same thing happens. Now because it's already fetched those images and displayed them, when I come over here, it's not going to re-grab those unless I've disabled cache for some reason, in which case every time I come over here, it's going to fetch them again. That will be very slow, so don't do that. But when they come to hover, then they click, already it's doing the work to start with. Now because I didn't do keyboard events, I'm doing a mouse event here. It's not going to work on the keyboard, but it's just an enhancement to speed it up slightly, so it's not a big deal. And because it doesn't work on mobile, they're not going to mouse over something on mobile, so we still need to keep this one in here for that. It's okay. It'll be fine. We're just going to do it twice. You may not like that. That's okay. Just thinking of other ways to maybe speed it up slightly for the end user. Now with that said, let me check one more time, and let's just come through here and show you how this looks. So you can see if you try to click ahead of time, it doesn't let you until it's all done. And to exaggerate this just a bit, let's come in here and let's change this to like, I don't know, let's do 1200, something like that. So a little bit more than a second. If I come in here and I click and I try to click more, it's going to not let me do anything until it's done with its transition. That's what that little transition end event does. So I can't click past that. Same thing with these indicators. They're going to take the same amount of time. Obviously, if they've got a long way to go, that cubic Bezier will like start slow and then slide them over that way. You may have noticed that when I open this up, something else weird happened. If I come all the way over here, like this, and then I close this off and I open it again, it slides back. Now that's because we actually never took off that transition when we closed the modal. So let's do that one more thing back here in Create Modal. Let's see, Gallery App, and then that's going to be it. That actually lives on the modal itself right here. And rather than duplicate our code, let's come down and grab it down this way. That was this transition of none. We're going to add that in right here. If we close that out, come in here, let's go all the way to the end, and then close this down, open it back up, and it should already be sitting there. It removed that transition and immediately went to the first index. It also allows us to click around like normal, and everything should be just fine. Now we got one more problem, and you'll notice now when I open this other one, it's not letting me do anything. And that's because, and now it's not letting me do anything here either. What in the world's going on? Well, we actually need to come up here as well and not only take off the transition, but set is moving back to false. The only time we ever set it to false was after the transition, which means if something didn't get to transition, so if we close this modal out after transitioning and then try to open this one, it never had that placed back to false. So we need to actually reset that to false as well. So if I save this, come over here, I should now be able to come over here and close out and then come over here and it should work as well. If I open this back up, it shouldn't slide back over. So those are a couple other got-yous. Those are the kind of use cases that you don't think about, which, like I said, is a good reason to use some kind of library when you're doing something in production. But the process of thinking through all this, I think, is a big help, and I hope it was a help to you. Thanks for sticking around for such a long video. I'm going to come up here, and let's do the thing we've been waiting to do, get rid of all 5. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you had a fun time. You learned a lot. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding. Hey, if you've stuck around past the end, then props to you. I've got a quick little message for you. And that's simply that if you've enjoyed the channel content, and especially this series, this took quite a while to produce, as you can imagine. If you could just share this channel with somebody who you think would enjoy it, whether that's on social media or something like that. I haven't done a whole lot of promotional stuff. I've never really wanted to turn this channel into anything. But now I'm about halfway through my watch hours, enough to get monetized. And eventually it would be nice to maybe get just a little bit something off of all the work. And so if you have benefited, I would appreciate it. And if you don't want to, that's fine. No worries. I will catch you in the next one. Thanks again.